Well, we're back, and today we're going to talk about temperaments and the spiritual life.
Spiritual life.
A little bit on this subject. I'm Laraine Bennett, Art Bennett. Yeah, and we wrote the books, The Temperament God Gave You, Temperament God Gave Your Spouse, The Temperament God Gave Your Kids. Yeah. Anyway, so it's interesting. The last time we talked about temperaments, we talked about relationships, and the thing is one of our most important relationships, if not the most important relationship, is our relationship with God. Right. And so, again, temperament can sometimes color our relationships, and including our relationship with God and the spiritual life. So, so we thought we'd talk a little bit about how temperament can affect, if we're not aware of it, it can affect our spiritual life as well.
Yeah, we'll do. We find that each of the temperaments has certain assets for the spiritual life, and each of the temperaments has some challenges. So we'll talk about the assets and challenges.
Good point.
The brief time we have.
So for example, the choleric. I was going to start with the challenges, but then I realized the choleric does have assets, and a great.
The cholerics have assets. Tremendous assets.
Exactly. So one of my favorite choleric saints is Saint Teresa of Avila, and she was such a wonderful choleric sanguine. I think she was always had big huge dreams, and she's founding monasteries and founding convents and all this kind of stuff that she did, and yet at the same time she was also. She struggled when she was younger, when she was first in the convent. She had gone to the convent kind of just to have a good time in a way, because at that time, actually, curiously enough, in Spain at that time when she was, they would often just go there and they'd sit and, chat with people. And she had all these visitors. Oftentimes, apparently she was very attractive. And a lot of men would come and talk to her, and she would have these great conversations, and she really liked all the attention, and she liked the chatter and all this kind of stuff. But then she had an awakening, and she realized that she needed to reform that her order that she was in at the time.
So she didn't just want to reform herself; she wanted to reform the order.
That's a good point.
That's a choleric.
Exactly, she does. She starts from scratch. Yeah, good point. But anyway, so she's a great choleric saint. So she had they have the asset, I would say, is their zeal, their drive for holiness, their ability to think big. Magnanimity is a good one.
Yeah.
And the problem is, if you're a choleric and you don't realize exactly what you're doing, you might not have the right goal. So the key is to have the right goal. So at first, she was maybe not pursuing the path of holiness, but then when she finally was struck by what she ought to do, what she knew what God wanted her to do, then she's off and running. And her convents exist to this day, are still running as well.
500 years later.
Yeah.
Great business
plan.
So,
yeah. But anyway, so for the choleric, it's very critical that they are following God's will and not their own will, because the temptation is always to do our own will. And
don't you think it's also, because clerics have wonderful assets for leadership, but that those are gifts given from God.
Right.
Rather not, I'm a great guy. I'm
that's a temptation.
Right. But it's like, God has given me certain gifts. Like, St. Paul had certain gifts. All the great saints have certain gifts. They realize that, but they're gifts from God.
Right.
That's
actually
not like
crucial.
Pulling myself up by my own bootstraps.
Yeah. So pride would be one of the
that's right.
The downside of the choleric. So the upside is they can be very zealous and very magnanimous, but they can also, on the downside, they can be prideful, assume that the gifts are their own, that they somehow created these gifts in themselves. And then the other challenge, I think, for the choleric is the choleric loves to be doing things. And so we love to be busy. Yeah. So we have to watch out for activism. So I would say, one thing to keep in mind, if you're a choleric, make sure that you set aside time every day to pray and to just really be quiet and to reflect on the scriptures, not to be thinking about my list of things to do, what I want to do, getting out there and get going, but instead just really reflecting and trying to listen to God. Listen to what God is telling you in your heart.
Right.
So now you talk about the phlegmatic.
Yeah, let me talk about the phlegmatic temperament. Again, 180 degrees temperament-wise from the choleric. Choleric, you think of St. Paul and this dynamism of St. Teresa of Avila and changing the orders and changing the world. And phlegmatics usually don't have that as a goal or even a desire, you want to get near it. Phlegmatics are just kind of trying to get along, trying to make life something enjoyable but not too extreme, not too out in the open. So they can be a little bit tempted to be complacent. Or on the spiritual life, a temptation for the phlegmatic is, I'm just going to be a nice guy. If I'm a nice guy, I get to heaven, right? I mean, that's all there is to it, right? And but that sells them short, radically short. And as somebody once said, Christ didn't die on the cross with the moral of the story being just be nice people out there and don't cause any trouble.
Right.
So on the other hand, we don't want to be provocative, but it's rare the phlegmatic that'll be provocatively trouble. But I think they are sometimes tempted to just go along with the flow.
And maybe just like do the things that you're supposed to do.
Kind
like
of a bare minimum kind of thing.
Yeah, kind of go to Mass. I go to Mass, every week. I'm good.
I'll keep most of the commandments, not all. I like some of the church teachings, not all. There can be kind of like, I just don't want any extra stress or any extra trouble, so I'm going to kind of find this kind of golden mean of just kind of casual stuff. But the problem with that, though, is if there's no zeal in our faith, if we don't realize that we do have to sometimes go against the current, even if we're phlegmatic, that there will be challenges and temptations that we face, because Christ does like to allow us to experience some temptations. So so why? Because he's a tough guy or a mean guy or a bad boss? No. Again, so we can grow. He wants us to continually grow. And a phlegmatic has to grow into the notion that you have to continually grow.
I was just thinking that when you were talking that maybe the phlegmatic was, it was the young man who said, I've kept all your I've kept all of God's commandments from youth. I've done everything.
Right.
And what else do you want? And he goes, give up everything and follow me. And he went away sad.
Right. So by the way, that's a really good point.
That could be
that sadness is one of the signs, I think, for the phlegmatic that they're not on the right path. So the rich young man thought he was on the right path.
Yeah.
And walked away sad. So I think that's the thing as a phlegmatic you want to watch out for. I'm playing by the rules. I'm being a pretty good guy. I'm not being too extreme. Am I really, really happy? Am I really, really fulfilled? So I think that's the cue to kind of rev it up a little bit, to allow yourself to be maybe more radically generous, or to sometimes be magnanimous, or to challenge a coworker who's talking trash about Christ and the church and something, and to get yourself in a stressful situation, trusting that Christ will help you through that. So I think it's to get outside of yourself, to not be afraid to suffer a little bit, not be afraid of the cross. Maybe that's common to all the temperaments, not to be afraid of the cross. But I think the phlegmatic has maybe a temptation to not do that. But when a phlegmatic does that, when they really roll up their sleeves and lean into it a little bit, it can be a tremendous impact on not only their spiritual life, but the life of others too.
Yeah.
Okay. What about the sanguine?
Yeah, let's talk about the sanguine.
What about the sanguine?
Good example for sanguine is St. Peter, of course. He's always like impulsively doing things, and so like when Christ is walking on the water, he's like impulsively joins him, and then he begins to sink because he takes his eyes off of Christ. Or when they're all called up onto the mountain of the Transfiguration, Peter says impulsively, even though he didn't know what he was saying, he goes, let's build 3 tents on the spot. Let's do something. Yay! Let's have tents. Let's have maybe a bazaar. We're going to have a little fair come around, sell some, popcorn. I don't know what he had in mind. No, but anyway.
It's a very liberal interpretation.
Yeah. So, and so the sanguine, the temptation, I think, in the spiritual life is to look at everything again through rose-colored glasses. Like everything is fine, I'm sure God will forgive me for all that stuff, whatever. Like take the very positive viewpoint and not going deep enough as they ought to in the spiritual life. Need to go deep.
It's a presumption a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit of presumption maybe. And always taking the positive spin on things. And also avoiding the cross, as you mentioned. Of course, that's probably common to everyone. But here's a good example from the scriptures where right after Peter he had said, who do you say that I am? And he says that you are the Christ. And he says, that's correct. And then he says, then Jesus tells him that he's going to go to Jerusalem, suffer many things, be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid, Lord, this shall never happen to you. This is the classic sanguine moment.
Right.
Because that's exactly what sanguines do. Sanguines say, no, it's not going to be bad. Don't worry about it. That can't happen. No. When things get tough, the sanguines go shopping. It's like, that's what we like to do. Make everything better.
Right.
But
so Christ wants sanguines to be leaders, not just cheerleaders.
Right. Ooh, that's a good line.
Like that? Yeah.
Leader. Very good.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think the antidote for that tendency of the sanguine, and again, we should mention one of their amazing positive qualities is their joy, their friendship, their ability to connect with others. They can be your charismatic leaders, just like Saint Peter was. But what they need to do is really go deep, go inside. That might be the struggle, the challenge for them to go deep and to really reflect on the scriptures and get to know Christ, get to know Jesus as their personal friend and their Lord and Savior, but really as a friend of their soul, because friendship is so critical to sanguines. Sanguines love their friends.
Wow,
and if Christ is their most important friend, then they will want to do whatever he says to do, and they will follow him, and they will then bring great joy in the apostolate or in whatever activities they're doing.
That's a good example of taking what might appear to be a weakness, but actually is a guarded strength. So don't just settle for friends like your buddies and your family and stuff, but go for the ultimate friendship, which is with Christ.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah.
Let me talk about the last temperament, the melancholic. The melancholic loves the high ideals, and we're all in on high ideals because they motivate us. They draw us outside of ourselves into something good, and even though they're sometimes unattainable, but they're so inspiring. But so one of the great things about the melancholic is comfort with that. Comfort with things like truth and beauty and grace and ritual and prayer and the consistency of the faith. They love that, and there's been such a need for that in the history of the church and the history of kind of spirituality in general. You need someone paying attention to details, someone who's really constantly putting the ideal and the goal out there so we don't get lost and get wayward. And I think melancholics oftentimes have almost an ease. Is that the right word? I mean, they like holy hours, they like prayer, an ease with the relationship with God in terms of obedience and in terms of conformity to the Word of God and stuff. The challenge sometimes for the melancholics is people, okay? Because people are not as high an ideal, maybe, and stuff. So they're all over the first part of the Great Commandment. Love the Lord our God with my heart, mind, soul, and strength. But they love the neighbor as thyself is kind of a back into after I get everything else taken for. They don't naturally, they're not naturally as charitable maybe as the other temperaments. They don't understand why they have to make these concessions all the time for people. Can't you just tell people what to do? Can't you just tell them what the rules are and the policy is? And why don't they just do it? This befuddles the melancholics. But the truth is, outside of the melancholics, most people aren't built that way. We are motivated by relationships, by understanding, and by enthusiasm and zeal. So that's one thing that the melancholic has to learn. Just putting the information out there isn't enough. You have to do formation. You have to help people grow and stuff. So one of the things we think is challenge for the melancholics, but really helps them, is to be more overt with gratitude. Do I have to say thank you just because somebody does something nice? Well, actually, it's a good idea. That's exactly what you want to do. You want to open your heart to give to people your appreciation of them. Because sometimes the melancholic can be some kind of rule-bound, a little pharisaical.
But also they think they're being appreciative. I think they don't always realize that sometimes in their head they are appreciative, but they didn't actually say it, maybe. They didn't actually express it. Or I said it once. How many times do I have to say it?
Right. How many times do I have to tell my wife I love her?
Yeah, I know.
I say it like on January 1st. Does that cover the whole year? The answer is no, it doesn't. Right. Yeah, that's right. It's more like eating than it is proclaiming. Well, that's a really, really good point. So what we try to encourage with the melancholic is to see the priority of really forgiving, charity to other people, gratitude to other people. So work on that second part of the Great Commandment, and that strengthens the first part. That's our quick overview of the 4 temperaments and the spiritual life. Any concluding comments?
No, I don't have any more comments to make.
Very good. Thank you.